As it is time for our extended couple of hours here on WCNC Plus. Inside the Impact studio here, we have at 8 o'clock our Hurricane IQ, our weather impact special. We're looking forward to this. Our team of meteorologists have been putting together this creative, original content for our people and folks, viewers in the area here. This happens every year. Brad Panovich, Brittany Van Voorhees, all of our meteorologists here have a say, and they talk about a number of different things in this Hurricane IQ weather impact special that'll happen tonight. So again, at 8 o'clock, they'll look back at the 2024 hurricane season in the Atlantic. And then we'll also, as we are now more than 8 months away from Hurricane Helene, they'll look back on the devastation, that day, that week, what that entire month kind of looked like. Obviously, we know that still many communities in Western North Carolina are looking to rebuild. So it's something that we, of course, want to focus on and talk about tonight. And then they will preview and look at the forecast for what the 2025 hurricane season might look like. So we are going to talk to Brad about that. We'll have the team at 8 o'clock. More on that as well. I want to bring in my co-anchor, Vanessa Rufus, who is here. We've got some overcrowding or a situation at CMPD Animal Care and Control. I know you just got off the phone interview with them, so tell us what we're dealing with here in the information that you just got.
Yeah, so Colin, you alluded to the fact that the shelter has been pretty full already lately. The shelter basically put out what they called an emergency call for fosters and adopters today. They received word that there was a criminal case where someone had been arrested. We don't know what the charges are for that person. By the way, we've inquired into that, so hopefully we can learn more about this. But the person who was arrested, apparently, once authorities got to their house, they essentially realized this person had dozens and dozens of dogs. So what's happening with these dogs? Well, the shelter inevitably has to take care of them while this person is going through the court process at this point. So knowing that the shelter is jam-packed as it is, they basically were scrambling with just hours before the shelter closes with trying to figure out where they're going to put all these dogs. And quite frankly, they didn't have any room to begin with. Like you talked about, I just got off the phone with the shelter. I spoke with the communications director, Melissa Nicely, who shared that they started the day with 15 open kennels. And while that sounds like some padding, a great number maybe to start with, this is a number that can easily be overwhelmed on a normal day with the normal intakes they get. So on any given day, they could have 15 plus people come in with a dog they're trying to surrender. They could have, like in this case, a situation where someone gets arrested and Animal Care and Control has to take care of these dogs. And that's the case that they're facing. So we'll let you know at 7 o'clock, the shelter officially has now closed for the day. And the shelter at this point is kind of, I don't want to say doing kennel gymnastics, but they're trying to make it work as good as possible where they don't have to euthanize for space, which sometimes, Colin, as we've talked about before with this issue, when they run out of space, they need to find space somehow, and unfortunately, if people don't come and adopt dogs or foster dogs, euthanasia is unfortunately a way to go at that point.
Okay, so let's give people their options and obviously what the timely manner looks like for folks to contact CMPD Animal Care and Control.
Yeah, so we've talked about a couple of locations that the shelter now has. They have their normal location, which is on Byram Drive, that's over by the airport. It's 8315 Byram Drive. That location is open from 11 in the morning until 7 at night. They also have a location on Toomey Avenue. That is going to be a location that will open up at 9 o'clock in the morning, and I believe they close at 5 in the evening. And a little background, this actually used to be the old Humane Society, and because of all the overcrowding and issues that they've been dealing with capacity recently, essentially got permission to use that as like a satellite location, but they basically can run adoptions and fosters out of that location. So I guess all of that's to say, if you go on the website, which by the way, our website has an article talking about this issue, we link you to adoptable dogs through a link on that website. you'll notice that some of the kennel locations will either say "to me" or it will actually have like a kennel number. So if it says "to me," just know that that is a dog who is over at the Toomey satellite location, not at the main Byram Drive location. And then something to further add here for the situation with this large intake that we had, we actually just got some images, which I think our producer Jeb has turned around quickly. These are actually the dogs that just came in today. So thank you to CMPD Animal Care and Control for sending those to us. You can see that there are some puppies, and there are also some adult dogs. We're told that most of these are actually puppies, and they had some female adult dogs that were also taken in. But good news for this case, as far as the process for adopting them out, it sounds like the owner has willingly surrendered them. So that cuts through a lot of red tape, whereas the shelter, in some cases, might have to fight to get ownership of the dogs to be able to adopt them out to the public. The situation will probably go a lot quicker now. The shelter can probably get these puppies out quickly to adoption, and hopefully there are people in the public who want to adopt some dogs because, you know, sadly, we had a whole bunch just come in that we saw to the shelter, and they really need to get these puppies some new homes.
And I know that I want to widen this discussion because I know there's an ongoing discussion. I alluded to this previously many months ago that in Cincinnati, they have a specific no-kill shelter that works with the county government to make sure that dogs and cats aren't euthanized. They find homes. And I know that there's an ongoing push to get something like that happening here in Charlotte. Where is that at? Can you update us on what that looks like here in Charlotte?
Yeah, so we know through a lot of our reporting here and just keeping folks abreast of the push that animal advocates have pushed on city leaders to try to get accomplished, that there has been a strong community push to not only get more resources to the shelter, because as we've shared before, the shelter was built when Charlotte's population, human population, was probably less than half of what it is now. And so when you have more people who move to a community, inevitably you have more animals, more pets that are moving into the community, and a higher demand for animal services. The shelter has an increased capacity since the population essentially ballooned over several years. And so we've seen not only advocates trying to talk about the importance of expanding capacity, but also expanding the resources in the sense of, you know, needing more staff members, needing more veterinarians to help care for these pets on staff, kennel assistants. So all of that we can see has been a push over several months, and it sounds like the city is trying to allocate money for that. Actually, when we look at the city budget, which we've talked about recently here, there was a push for some of that to be allocated in the budget, and also a separation. So this is interesting. The concept is to separate CMPD Animal Care and Control from PD. So I don't want to say this is a unique situation, but not many communities these days we see have animal services under the police department. And that can be tricky. For example, when you think about if I'm a police chief and I know that I'm getting limited funds from the city or county, you know, that's in control of our budget, am I going to really push for, you know, more kennel assistants, or am I going to push for more 911 telecommunicators? And we totally understand, you know, the reason, you know, from a public safety standpoint, why, you know, in some cases a police chief might push for the telecommunicators, but it doesn't mean that they don't need the kennel assistants too. It's just, you know, limited resources, right, and trying to figure out how to allocate that. But we see the city manager pushing for, in this new budget, the separation of the two entities, where the police chief can essentially focus on police matters, and whoever is leading the animal care and control department, who we know there's a director currently over them, could basically, and we don't know some of the logistics of this yet, but report directly to the city manager instead of reporting to the police chief, or report to an operations manager who then reports to the city manager. I think some of that is still up in the air, but that's the dialogue that's underway right now.
Yeah, you're right. It's very odd to have that under the police department, and it puts, kind of pigeonholes the chief, right? Because you know that that person needs the funding that they need for their officers, for the community, and it's tough to discuss that and then obviously try and get funding for both things. So I know that that's a hard situation. Hopefully they'll figure it out, because this is something that obviously this community needs, as we are pointing out tonight, that there has to be some changes. So hopefully folks will come out, just go over again, because I think sometimes people think of adopting a pet just may be a little bit overwhelming for them.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of easy steps to getting towards that, or you don't even have to adopt a pet, right? There are other ways that you can save a life, I guess you could say, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we find that fostering sometimes can be a good, foray into pet ownership if you feel like you're not sure if you want to make that leap and make that commitment. And that's something certainly that the shelter offers. So the fostering program, which it's been really great to see as far as just seeing the support for the shelter, has blossomed a lot over recent years. It's probably, several hundred people large at this point in the community who foster animals, which is super cool to see. But this is a situation where you could, for example, take a pet home for a few days, maybe a couple weeks, see how they do in your house. Because, as a pet owner, I know you have cats. Sometimes cats don't like to get along with other cats. Sometimes cats get along with dogs, and sometimes they don't. And, if you have kids, sometimes dogs don't get along with kids, and sometimes they do. So it's a great way to kind of test that a little bit. And then the other situation that we see is called the staycation that they have at CMPD Animal Care and Control, where this is more of a set period of time. It's usually a few days. I think it can be extended in some, situations. But it's a really low commitment in the sense that you only have the animal for a few days. You can see if that's a good fit for your family, and then you can make the leap to fully adopt the dog if you want, or the cat in that situation. But also, if you don't think you're going to eventually go down the adoption path, you can, at the very least, just get the animal out of the shelter for a few days, which does a great deal to help with the capacity. It gives the shelter a little bit more breathing room because they don't have that kennel used up anymore. And it helps the animal because we see, as a volunteer, I go and walk dogs at the shelter. After a few days, and sometimes in a few weeks, if the dog is in a kennel for a while, only getting out, when a volunteer comes or a staff member comes to walk them, they can get quite stir crazy. I don't know how else to put it, but it's just like being, imagine being in a kennel for hours and hours and hours on end. Maybe you get out, maybe you don't, and it kind of will wear on the animal in a mental health perspective, really.
Yeah, there are a lot of facets to this issue that folks obviously need to pay attention to, and a lot of folks do, because whenever we put out the call, as I said on our linear show at 5 and 6, that they usually show up in droves, and people are going to need to show up, especially over the next 24 to 48 hours to make sure that dogs and potentially other animals aren't euthanized to make space. So my last thing would be anything that we missed. I know that we have this article over on WCNC.com right now for people listening. Anything else that you wanted to talk about?
Well, we should mention, since we showed some of the pictures, because the owner did surrender this large batch of puppies and, like we said, adult female dogs, they should all be, after they're vetted medically and behaviorally by the staff there, they should be good to go to be adopted quite soon. And so I'll mention that. And then the other thing I'll throw out there, and it feels like a broken record. I hear this from shelter staff time and time again. They feel like they are always putting out the call for capacity. I would just say, unfortunately, folks, be prepared to hear it more and more, because we're in a climate at this point where the shelter is just dealing with a lot of intakes. We've heard about the fact that, at one point we were hearing from the shelter evictions were rising, and usually when you get evictions rising, you see animals that get seized from those evictions, and so the economy can play a role. The fact that the population is consistently growing, that can play a role in the amount of animals. And then we're in the summertime, which, as you know, because we do clear the shelters in August usually to kind of talk about the fact how summer is super busy for shelters. We're in a period of the year where normally, on a normal basis, you just have a lot of animals that are coming in and need help. So I'll just sadly just remind folks that the problem will probably persist for weeks, if not months,
Yeah, we'll continue to obviously let folks know when the help is needed. Hopefully there will be some shifts, obviously, in the budget that we will watch for. Vanessa, I appreciate your time.
Thanks for talking about this.
Yeah, of course. No problem. All right, we are going to shift because we are waiting for Chief Meteorologist Brad Panovich to enter the Impact Studio here in the coming minutes. Our hurricane special isn't until 8 o'clock, but Brad's going to talk to us a little bit more about what is going to be on at 8 o'clock, what they're going to dive into. And I do want to run through some of the numbers that we're seeing here, Jeb, ahead of our special. So in 2024, and I'm sure Brad's going to go into this even in more depth, but as we wait, we'll kill a little bit of time and give you these numbers. Say it again?
I said so we could go to if you want to.
Okay. Yeah. We'll talk this up, and then if I run out of stuff, we can always toss. But the Atlantic Basin itself saw 18 named storms in 2024. 11 of those were hurricanes. 5 intensified to major hurricanes. 5 hurricanes actually made landfall in the United States, one of those being Helene, clearly. So last year was a record-setting season. We saw the earliest Atlantic Basin Category 5 hurricane on record. That was Hurricane Beryl. And then it caused significant storm surge flooding across parts of Texas and Louisiana after making landfall in Texas as a Category 1 storm. And I don't want to forget, it's been 20 years since Katrina. So a lot of folks in New Orleans obviously bating their breath, kind of holding on to hope that this year isn't something as bad as what we saw in 2005. So it's been 20 years clearly, and there's been a number of situations that have changed things, not necessarily just at the NWS, but in NOAA as well. So those are all things that we're watching, how they impact certain forecasts. And as we look ahead to the hurricane season, that could really play a part as to who is impacted and who knows what when. So Brad is here. He's had a pretty busy day. This is a big day for us here at WCNC Charlotte. We are all awaiting with bated breath, I just said, Brad, before you came in here for the hurricane special. I know you don't want to give too much away. You guys got a lot of statistics that you guys go through to make sure that you create this original piece of content. So if you will, talk a little about how you create something like what we're about to see at 8.
Well, so the big story with this is going to be, it's generally a giant weather IQ for hurricanes. So the thing I love about it is no matter, what you want to learn, do you want to know what the Sanford system scale looks like? Do you want to know how NOAA hurricane hunters are being affected by budget cuts? We've got what a wind tunnel and what Category 4 winds look like. Chris Mulcahy looks ridiculous, and it's going to be awesome. You got to see that part because it looks really, really cool. But just all the, the kind of the nuts and bolts of how hurricanes form, how we forecast them, and really one of the things we'll focus on too is what the season's going to look like. So we've got a preseason look at the forecast, and that's really important. And we're going to look back, unfortunately, at what was a devastating storm for us with Hurricane Helene. And I think the one thing about Helene is, it's a horrible situation, Colin. We went through that last year, and it's still recovering. But there's a lot of lessons we learned from that storm as well that we can take into future seasons. So I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be an evergreen kind of special too, because if you watch it tonight on our air or on WCNC Plus, or you wait and watch it on demand later, it's going to be that kind of content that you can watch as the season gets closer, because even though the season started on the 1st, the peak really is August through November. I was doing a presentation tonight with Team Rubicon. If you're not familiar with them, they're a veteran-backed relief organization that goes around and helps with the recovery from hurricanes. So I was presenting the hurricane season forecast to them. And one of the things I was telling them, even though the season starts on June 1st, between August 1st and the end of November, which is the end of the season, 87% of all storms formed between those periods. So when August 1st hits, that's kind of like really when things ramp up. It's kind of like the fourth quarter of a game. That's when, things really start happening.
Well, and that's when Katrina happened, right? In August. And you were down there. I had family that was just devastated by it. We were there 2 weeks after and almost weren't even let into the city at that time. I can't imagine your trauma and the things that you had to deal with as well. And I'm sure we can get to that at some point. But a lot of folks are pinpointing, right? Because we're 20 years out from that storm. Obviously, we've got different conditions than what we saw last year in terms of El Nino, those type of things. So talk about that, right? And then the setup that we're seeing, because you alluded to it. NOAA has had drastic cuts across the board. I've seen meteorologists from Miami all the way to New York talking about the preparedness And this is what you guys are here for and why we're having this special. But talk a little about what we can expect. And do you think that's going to impact folks, the NOAA cuts?
It's hard to say. I know there's a lot of fear.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing is we just don't know.
Okay.
And so I will tell you this, and my good friend John Morales down in Miami did an amazing presentation showing basically what it would look like without the data that for some of the storms we've had in the past.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the concern. The good thing is that the Hurricane Center was relatively untouched from a staffing standpoint, but the problem is the data, like the weather balloons, the satellite data, the research into the models, and then the NOAA hurricane hunters lost some staffing and funding. That could end up impacting the forecast directly. So you could have enough people, but not enough information to issue a forecast. And the one thing we've learned about hurricanes is the direct measurement of the storm is really vitally important. So flying into the storm is probably the most valuable piece of information we have, because think about these storms. They form out over the Atlantic. There's no airports, there's no Doppler radars, there's no surface observations. So the only data we have is from a satellite. So when we fly into the storm, we get that information we normally would have over land, and it really helps us forecast a whole lot better. And one of the stories in our Hurricane IQ special tonight is the difference between the NOAA hurricane hunters and the 53rd Weather Reconnaissance, which is the Air Force hurricane hunters. There's two versions. So the Air Force hurricane hunters were not impacted by the cuts, but NOAA was. And NOAA has two planes. They're both nicknamed Miss Piggy and Kermit. And they fly into the storms, but they have specific radars on them. And the data they collect not only helps in real time, but it's used for forecasting in the future, research, collecting data for modeling. So the data they use actually helps us down the road. And then they have a third aircraft. It's an aircraft called the Gulfstream. The Gulfstream I-4 is actually, or I-5, excuse me, is a high-flying aircraft. It doesn't fly into hurricanes. It flies around them to sample the upper atmosphere, kind of like a moving weather balloon. And it takes the atmosphere stirring currents to let us know where the storm could go. So that takes the place of upper air data that we don't have. If we lose that data, it's actually, those three planes by themselves are more important than almost all the other planes that the Air Force has because of the data that they give us for future storms. So that's where the cuts could end up being impactful. And then on the local level, the local forecast offices, let's say like locally Greenville, Spartanburg, they're okay, but Columbia, South Carolina lost their meteorologist in charge. They're the offices that issued the flood warnings, the tornado warnings, the things that happen when the storm makes landfall. If they're short-staffed, then that could have an impact locally. So those are where we could see impacts. But to be completely transparent, we just don't know how this is going to happen. There's just this fear of that missing data and how that could impact us going forward.
Well, and I want to harken back to last year's storms, right? We had the majority of the deaths were in North and South Carolina, and a lot of it was Hurricane Helene, right? But then we had Hurricane Milton. That was a Category 3 storm. That was Siesta Key, which we just saw a report that they're still rebuilding. And so there were 5 storms that made landfall last year, 3 that hit Florida itself. So what are we expecting in terms of, you will go into this, I know, El Nino, La Nina, those type of situations. How important is that, though, in figuring out the forecast?
So, we basically have 3 phases of what we call the ENSO, which is the El Nino Southern Oscillation. There's El Nino, which is warmer water in the Pacific. That is actually what you want to see, Colin, because that reduces the number of hurricanes in the Atlantic. La Nina is the worst. That's when we get more storms. And to give you an example, I have in front of me my PowerPoint presentation of the top 10 most active Atlantic hurricane seasons. Number 1 was 2020, 30 storms, La Nina year. Number 2, the year you just mentioned, 2005, 28 storms, La Nina year. Number 3, 2021, 21 storms. La Nina year. So you do not want to see a La Nina year. And right now we're in a neutral phase, which means in between La Nina and El Nino, but there's some hints that it could trend towards a weak La Nina. So that's not what we want to see, because that typically means a lot more storms. Right,
which is probably why we're seeing so much hesitancy in New Orleans and Florida, those type of things.
Yeah, and that's why you're seeing every forecast agency, whether it's Colorado State, NC State, or NOAA, all issuing above average seasons for hurricanes.
Interesting.
Because we think the La Nina, or the neutral phase, La Nada we call it, are both going to be possible, or one or the other. Both would probably mean more storms. And then on top of that, we just have this crazy warm water. I was looking at the water temperatures in the Gulf, the Caribbean, and the Western Atlantic, the stuff closest to the United States. It's already at the level it would be in August or September.
That's not good.
And it's only June.
That's not good.
So
Yeah.
the water's already warm enough. That's why if we get an early season storm, it could ramp up really quickly.
Man. Well, let's talk about then the impacts to North and South Carolina, which we don't know, right? Because we don't exactly know what storms we'll see. But you had alluded to some of the things that we learned from Helene. What's one thing that you can maybe incorporate to our discussion right now without giving everything away at 8 that you learned personally, or that maybe meteorologists as a whole around the country looked at the situation and said, we need to do this better?
Communication is everything. We are really good at forecasting these storms. I'm not just saying that to pat ourselves on the back.
Right.
I can show you the stats. We have gotten really good at forecasting storms. What we're not good at is communicating the risks.
Yeah.
And you're probably saying, well, what do you mean? Well, Helene was, believe it or not, Helene was the best forecasted storm from an accuracy standpoint last season. Okay. But it caused the most fatalities, Colin.
Yeah.
That, as a meteorologist, is the most frustrating thing to think about. The best forecast we had, technically, had the worst outcome from loss of life. So obviously the forecast was good. So what happened?
Right.
We did not communicate, or we didn't do it well enough, or people inland just did not take the storm seriously enough.
Right.
And I think that's where we're trying to struggle with, like, how do we communicate to people that live in the mountains of North Carolina? This is not a coastal event. This is an event for you.
Right.
And one of the things I think that I've learned in my 20-some years here is don't look for storms making landfall on the Carolina coast. If you live there, yes, they're important. For us here in the Western Carolinas, the panhandle of Florida and the Eastern Gulf, if the storms come from that direction, that puts our mountains in the Western Carolinas in the worst weather. In fact, the worst storms we've had here locally, other than Florence, which came in from the coast, our Carolina coast, the worst storms I've seen, Helene, Francis, Faye, let me think of Ivan, Fred, they all came up through the Florida Panhandle. Fred, by the way, 36 tornado warnings in our area in one day from Fred.
My goodness.
And it also killed 8 people in a campground in Carusa, North Carolina, because of a flash flood. So all those storms that caused the most damage here came from the Gulf and came up from the south, not from our coastline, because typically those would stay. We would be on the west side of the storm, not the east side.
Right.
And so what we've learned, and from a communication standpoint, to get back to Helene, is like, hey, if a storm is making landfall in Pensacola, Florida, and it's going to move to Nashville, Tennessee, if you're in western North Carolina, that's bad. That is not a good thing. That puts us in the heaviest rain, the biggest tornado risk, maybe even sometimes the biggest wind risk. In fact, the most wind we've seen here recently was Hurricane Michael, Category 5, the last Category 5 that hit the U.S. That hit down in Mexico Beach, Florida.
Okay.
Where's that? The Panhandle of Florida. It moved up here. We had 50, 60 mile an hour winds and massive power outages because trees were blown down. So, so if I were to give you one piece of advice this year, don't worry about storms as much hitting our coast unless you have beach property out there or you're there. For us in Charlotte West, the Western Carolinas, look for storms coming up from Florida or the Gulf and maybe even Alabama, the Eastern Gulf.
Okay. Those are good things because, when you move here, you tend to think about some of those storms that come from, the lower Atlantic basin, that type of thing. So it's great to know. I did want to clarify, because we were talking about the communication, and you've touched on this. I think you guys know in a way how to communicate it, but you don't also want to fearmonger, right? Because so many people out there are like listening for that, right? And they use that maybe as a way to tune out, and that is a fine line to have to walk, because we've discussed this. And right after Helene, you even said this. Should I have said verbatim, in some respects, this is a lifetime, once in a lifetime event, right? But how do you communicate that to let folks know, right? Like, don't be panicked, but this is a situation where you have to get out the door now. And so I just want to clarify that I think you guys communicate really well, but it's that fine line of knowing, right, how to not fearmonger. And you guys, I think you specifically do a great job. Our team does a great job at that. So I do want to give kudos to you, because I think you guys do know how to do it. It's just, it's a tough situation to be in, right?
Yeah. So the hard part about Helene, and I thought we did a pretty good job. I went back. I'm very retrospective. We look back what we said. I said catastrophic so many times.
Okay.
And the problem is, Colin, it wasn't enough. I mean,
Yeah.
because honestly, and this goes back to just like human nature.
Yeah.
There was people that live in Western North Carolina that have never experienced anything like this. So it didn't matter what kind of picture I painted.
Right.
Their life experience tells them, oh, that's not going to happen because I've
Exactly.
lived here my whole life and this
Right.
never happened. Or my mom has lived here her whole life. That's why we were talking a lot about the flood of 1940 and the flood of 1916. The problem is very few people are alive, if at all, from either of those floods or have relatives from those floods. There's just historical markers that say this is where the water was in 1940.
Yeah.
But if you don't remember that, how do you know what to expect? So
Right.
there's a saying we have, and emergency managers use quite a bit, your level of preparedness is only as good as your memory of the last disaster.
Right.
And if you have no memory, you're not going to do anything. This is why Helene, in some ways, was a silver lining, because guess what? Every storm that comes now, everyone in the western part of the state is going to take every storm seriously. I saw this
Exactly.
after Katrina. Katrina, when I was down in New Orleans with Katrina, there was 2 generations of New Orleanians who hadn't experienced a significant storm in their lifetime. They evacuated 5 or 6 times in their life and nothing happened. So guess what a lot of them did? They didn't leave.
Right. And the levees broke.
But the people that did leave during all those storms, the people that went through Camille and Betsy in the 60s.
Exactly.
Because they remembered.
My dad went through that. Yep.
Now the people that went through Katrina, they're the first ones out of town.
Yeah.
Because they're like, we're not doing that again. And that's the thing about storms like this. Sometimes people say, yeah, you could lose your life, and that's definitely the number one concern. But like what we learned in Katrina, why would you want to stay there after a storm? You have no power,
Right.
no food,
Right.
no gas, no air conditioning. It's miserable. So sometimes you leave not to save your life, but to just have quality of life, because staying there is not ideal. You do not want to be there after a storm hits.
Right. Exactly. Well, let's talk about the preparation,
Yep.
because that's going to be another big part of this. And I hear you talk about all the time,
Yeah.
whether radios having multiple ways of being connected to what's going on. And you have talked about this so many times, obviously seeing what happened in Missouri about a month
Yeah.
ago, that overnight storms, and then you just alluded to it, that hurricanes can have tornado warnings
Tornadoes.
associated with it. So
Yeah.
talk about that preparation phase, because I often, I don't remember, or sometimes I don't think about the fact that we could have tornado warnings on the backside of that, which could be
Yeah.
a totally different situation. So preparation as a whole, where do we start?
So the first thing, and this is why we're doing the special right now, early in the season, I just mentioned like August 1st is when things really ramp up. So June and July, you still have time to somewhat prepare. Do you have a plan? Like, if we have to evacuate, do I live in a flood zone? Where would I go? Put an emergency kit together. What does that emergency kit entail? Well, 3 days of food and water and medicine, and probably some cash.
Okay.
Think about what you need. And the great thing about these emergency kits, if you never use it during hurricane season, let's hope you don't have to. It can be used for any emergency, right? But I would think the biggest thing, especially for folks in the metro area, Charlotte, I remember giving the presentation about Helene, and folks in the mountains are resilient people, as we learned.
Yeah.
They actually are more equipped to go without power and water for a couple days because of the isolation they already live in. In Charlotte, if the power goes out for a couple hours, Colin, you know how people here are freaking out, right?
Right.
They have no cell service, no power, their refrigerator. Think about going without power for days or weeks.
Yeah.
Are you prepared for that? So think about in your house, like, what would I do if we lost power for the next week? Like, how would I even like make dinner, or like, feed my kids, or how would I do anything? So those are the kind of things you should be thinking in the back of your mind, because if the power grid fails because of a storm, there's all this trickle down of like medical devices and air conditioning, and then heat stroke becomes a problem. And then communication, we talked about that. If we have no form of communication, then if there's a storm after that, or
Right.
severe weather the day after, we can't communicate that. So you mentioned the 3 ways to get warnings, and I think that's really important, because phones are great, but we are almost too reliant on these sometimes, because that's one way to get information. But you should still have a weather radio, even if it's a 2-way, like a handheld that you can tune to it. Have friends or family that can call or text you, watch us, streaming our app.
Yeah.
There's multitude of ways, but have 3 ways to get warnings in case the first one fails. You've got the backup. If the backup fails, you've got another one. So those would be the number one things I would say. Have
Okay.
a kit, a
Okay.
plan, 3 ways to get warnings,
Yeah.
and think in the back of your mind, if you're wondering, like, how do I prepare for a hurricane? Think of power outage, because that's honestly probably the biggest impact any of us will feel.
Got you. Last thing, I know we've got just under about 26 minutes until our special at 8. I know you still got some other things to do. You've been talking all day. So my last thing is, what else should we look out for? Anything else that I'm missing that I didn't ask you that you wanted to talk about? Anything that comes to mind?
I think the biggest thing, and we talked a little bit about this, but just know hurricanes are not just a coastal event.
Yeah.
I think if there's one thing Helene and really Hugo before this, I think about Hugo, 1989.
Mm-hmm.
When I moved here, I was not here for Hugo. I think people think I was, but I was not. I have not been here that long. I do know about Hugo, but that's all I heard about was like, oh my gosh, Hugo, Hugo this, Hugo that. And I heard the stories of reporters and photographers who worked here at the time and how they all went to the coast and nothing happened, and they came here and people, it was like Lord of the Flies. Yeah. Like, we need water. That was a wake-up call, but it's been a long time, and then Helene hit. But both of those tell you something. Those were hurricanes that impacted well inland. And so if you're new to the area, which we have a lot of transplants, right? If you're new to the Charlotte area, the Western Carolinas, hurricanes happen here.
Yeah.
We have impacts. It's not storm surge like we have on the coast. That's why people evacuate. It's tornadoes, it's wind, and it's flooding. Freshwater flooding has become the #1 killer in hurricanes. It used to be storm surge. The good news is we fixed that, because guess what? Everyone leaves the coast.
Yeah.
The problem is now people inland aren't watching these storms closely enough, and freshwater flooding, which is rainfall, causing flooding. And ironically, some of the people that evacuated from the storm surge are evacuating inland to areas where there's freshwater flooding. And so that has become the #1 threat, is freshwater flooding. And so we want people to take it seriously. And you're probably saying, hey, I bought this house, I'm not in the floodplain. Hey, if you live where it rains, it can flood.
Right.
That's just the truth. Storm drain clogs up. If it rains fast enough, hard enough, you're going to get flooding. And I've seen it. 3, 4, 5 inches of rain an hour, it doesn't matter where you live. That's going to cause a flash flood.
Right.
You don't need to be near a creek or stream. Ask the folks in the mountains from Helene. Some of them lived on the side of a mountain way above the creek, and water was literally pouring down the side of the mountain.
There were mudslides everywhere.
It can happen anywhere.
Right.
So I think that would be the biggest thing I want people to take away from this, is no matter where you live, there is a threat from hurricanes.
Okay. Well, we are certainly looking forward to this. I know how much work, I've seen it personally, how much work you guys put into this. It is a labor of love, and that's why we are so blessed to have you guys on our team and keeping us in the area safe. Honestly, I don't just say this because I'm biased and I work with you, but you are one of the best meteorologists in the entire country. So it's great to have you here, and we're really looking forward to your forecasting. And you just do a great job, man. We really appreciate you.
I appreciate it. And let me just tell everyone who watches tonight, if you're watching this, hey, if you have questions for us, if you see something and you want to shoot us a question via social media or email, we'd love to answer those questions on air. I can answer them digitally as well.
Cool.
And also, I've been doing this a lot this week. If you have a group or an organization that it needs a weather presentation about hurricane season, I'd love to come talk to you about preparedness, because I think it's a labor of love to get out and tell as many people as possible about how to prepare and get ready for this storm.
It's about saving lives. That's what it's about. So, all right, Brad, cannot wait for the 8 o'clock show. Thank you so much. I'll let you go, my friend. We have more here on Live Impact News for you. In fact, in New York City, there are 9 candidates facing off for the Democratic mayoral primary debate. So some interesting stuff. One of them, Mr. Cuomo. So we'll go to this now.
He reports to him.
Every word a lie, and he knows.
Well, then it's easy enough to check.
Mr. Cuomo, you're using your time, just so you know. You're going to have 30 seconds.
Yeah. On bail reform, we all talk about how terrible Rikers Island is, and it is. It's a disgrace that it is still being operated by this city.
Your time is up, Mr. Cuomo. I'm sorry.
Per person, and
time is up. I'm sorry. I am. Mr. Myrie, you voted for bail reform as well. How would you stop shoplifters if you were the mayor, and other low-level crimes that are taking a toll on our city?
Anyone that breaks the law needs to be held accountable, and we made changes to our criminal justice laws because things needed to change. And here's how I know. I was robbed with my mom in an elevator in the building that I grew up in when I was very young. Her worldview is informed by that experience. We have to ensure that every New Yorker feels safe in every neighborhood, wherever they are, and that is what I'm going to do as mayor. I'm going to return our police headcount to what it was in 2018, and I'm going to ensure that all New Yorkers feel safe wherever they are.
Time. Thank you. Rosarina.
Yeah, Ms. Ramos, the same questions to you. You voted for bail reform. How would you stop shoplifters and other low-level crime to take a toll in the city?
Well, we have a little more than 1,000 recidivists in the city of New York, and I've been hard at work in the Senate already, making sure that we're looking at treatment courts in cases of kleptomania. But clearly, there are organized rings that need to be taken down by the NYPD. So I'm here to say that there's accountability to be had, but we also have to make sure that there is a balance with the job opportunities that should open up if we address all of the crises that we are facing.
But let's remember that you voted for the bail reform.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Mandani, you opposed to rollbacks to bail reform, and you do not want to hire more cops above the current authorized levels. How would you stop shoplifters and these repeat offenders? What's your approach?
I want to sustain the headcount that we have in the police department. And I want to listen to police officers who are leaving in droves from the department because they're being asked to do the work of mental health professionals and social workers. Right now, police officers pick up hundreds of phone calls a day that are mental health crises, hundreds of thousands a year. That's not the work that they signed up to do. And when it comes to shoplifting and retail theft, the key here is to listen to workers themselves. They have spoken time and time again about the need for increased staffing in our Walgreens and our Duane Reades. And when it comes to organized crime,
Thank you very much.
we have to ensure the police actually hold them accountable.
Thank you, Mr. Mandani. Mr. Blake, do you see a need for change to the bail reform, and how would you end the retail theft as mayor?
Absolutely. So I proudly supported it when I was in the assembly because Khalif Browder was my constituent. And we talked about raise the age and bail reform and speedy trial. We had to do that. But we need to make it different and stronger now. And to your question, that means we have to hold repeat offenders more accountable, be much more attentive to that degree. But the broader dynamic, if we help New Yorkers make and keep more money in their pocket in the first place, then we wouldn't have people speaking about shoplifting. That's why we need to have local median income. That's why we have to have guaranteed income. That's why we have to help people on the front end so we're not talking about them being arrested on the back end.
Thank you so much, Mr. Blake. Sally.
Thank you. Mr. Stringer, we're going to go to you with the same question. Do you see a need for any further changes to the state's bail laws, and how would you tackle retail theft as mayor?
Well, look, I've seen retail theft in my own neighborhood, walking into a Duane Reade with my kids and just seeing the shelves empty and then having to push a button, wait 10 minutes for a young staffer whose job is not to be my personal shopper. This is wrong, and that's why we need to put cops on the beat, working with the small businesses to root out the people who are constantly coming back to do this. But we also have to make sure that the people who are doing the stealing also have opportunities to get them the housing and the services that they need. See, we have to walk and chew gum at the same time when it comes to criminal justice.
I just want, since you used your time, just a yes or no question. Do you see a need for further changes to the state's bail laws? Just yes or no.
Look, I think right now it's been changed a couple of times.
Okay.
When
Not a
Cuomo,
yes or no.
let me just say, when Cuomo signed it, he didn't do the work of a mayor or governor. The mayor and the governor are supposed to go through legislation and find the loopholes, and he didn't do that, and that's too bad.
We're moving on to Ms. Adams. Ms. Adams, same question to you. Do you see any need for changes to the state's bail laws, and how do you plan to tackle retail theft as mayor?
Well, the state just made some adjustments and some tweaks, so let's see how that goes. We need to take a look at the ringleaders at the higher levels of the folks that are carrying and actually doing the stealing. Low-level criminals are wasting away on Rikers Island. Some have committed suicide under this current administration. So what we need to do as far as public safety is concerned, I will fill the over 2,000 vacancies within the NYPD in my first 8 months as mayor. This is what we need to look at. Others are looking at bringing in thousands and thousands of police officers. We have vacancies to fill. This will work. This is what our NYPD needs, better management.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lander, do you see a need for changes to bail reform, and what would you do as mayor about this retail theft?
I've got a detailed plan to combat retail theft, so the toothpaste is not always behind lock and key. You can look it up on my website to
All right, we're going to try and fix this. I do want to give you some information running down here. We've got NYC Council Speaker Adrian Adams. We've got former City Comptroller Scott Stringer, and Brooklyn State Senator Zellner Marie, Queens State Senator Jessica Ramos. There's a number of individuals, even a hedge fund manager and a former Bronx State Assemblyman who are all participating in this. So I believe we fixed our feed, Jeb. All right, we'll go back to it now.
Investigations can be thorough. And I've actually taken the idea from the conservative Manhattan Institute that drug treatment courts need to be central in our response.
You just named two of my bills, the Retail Worker Safety Act with panic buttons and my mental health court expansion.
Ranked choice voting.
Quick response? Okay.
As mayor.
All right, thank you. Sally, you had a quick question here.
Yeah, well, I guess we also for Mr. Tilson.
Yes. Mr. Tilson, I'm going to let you respond. But just on that,
Yeah, I guess because Mr. Lander brought her up, just a quick show of hands, who else would keep Jessica Tisch as police commissioner? Okay, thank you.
Haven't decided yet.
Okay.
Correct.
All right. Mr. Tilson, you said you would cut crime by 50%. Do you want changes to bail reform? What can you do to tackle this low-level crime?
Yeah, well, I do very much believe we need to make substantial changes to bail reform and discovery reform, both of which went too far. Like what I said earlier, we basically decriminalized all low-level crime. Shocker, it went way up. So we need to have more police officers enforcing the law, and we need to change the legislation such that prosecutors can actually punish repeat offenders. I just talked to a cop right here in Midtown North last week who told me they're down from 300 cops to 120, and they have to fill out so much paperwork when they make an arrest that the criminal is back out onto the street before they're finished with the paper.
All right, Mr. Tilson, thank you. Rosalina.
Thank you, David. Now we're going to talk about e-bikes. Bicycle deaths in the city have reached record heights in the recent years, with injuries also surging, many involving, of course, e-bikes. Just the past hour, Mayor Adams announced a plan to impose a 15-mile-per-hour speed limit on e-bikes. Do you believe this is the right way to improve safety? And what else would you do, Ms. Adams? You have 30 seconds to answer.
Yeah, a lot of those, the e-bike riders are people that deliver food to our homes, and they have families as well. I do believe that there needs to be a closer look, which we are doing in the City Council as far as regulation is concerned, but we have to be careful.
But this regulation with 50 miles per hour, is this the right approach to regulate it?
Well, as the mayor normally does, he does not collaborate with the City Council, which had we done that collaboration together, we might have come up with a different solution other than 50 miles, and I believe is a penalty, which we could have come together and realized something much more reasonable for e-bike riders.
Just to clarify.
15
miles. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Adams. Mr. Lander.
I think the pedal assist city bikes go 17 miles per hour, so that seems pretty good to me. But we've got to go upstream here to the folks that are causing this. Uber Eats and Seamless and DoorDash need to be held accountable for the trips that are taken where they're making money. They've got the data to keep folks safe. And, you can't operate a car dealership in this city that sells cars without license plates to people without driver's licenses. So we've got to hold the sellers of mopeds accountable. Those are motor vehicles, and they need to be treated that way if you're going to sell them. They've got to have licenses. They've got to have license plates. They have to operate safely.
Ms. Ramos.
Well, we have to end the criminalization of our delivery workers and bicycle riders. A lot of enforcement has now changed from civil summonses to criminal tickets, and that is leaving breadcrumbs for ICE and leaving many of our community members vulnerable. That being said, it is high time that we post speed limits and adapt our street design for the use of bikes and e-bikes. The fact is that we have to get them off the sidewalks. We have to make sure that they are abiding by the rules. And this is why we need public education in English, in Espanol, in all of the languages that our riders speak.
Thank you very much. Mr. Myrie.
There's no question that things feel different on our streets and that these categories of vehicles are not built for our current structure and on our streetscape. So we have to regulate. We have to hold the companies that are making money more accountable on this. But we also have to ensure that we are doing this in collaboration, doing this in a smart way, and ensuring that the enforcement on this is actually going to be going through. What we have seen is uneven enforcement in this space, and that's why there are older adults in this city that are afraid to cross the street because of how things feel.
Thank you very much. Mr. Cuomo.
Yes, I think this is Another example of just dysfunctional city management, we passed a state law allowing e-bikes. It was supposed to be regulated by the city. You've had all sorts of accidents, all sorts of warnings. The city has done nothing. The speed has to come down. City bikes voluntarily came down to 17 miles an hour. You have these e-bikes, some of them doing 25, 30 miles an hour. You have to bring down the speeds, but you also have to have them registered by the apps. They're the ones who are making the money. Let them license, let them register, let them pay the tickets.
Thank you very much. Mr. Tilson.
This issue is actually quite personal to me because I ride my bike in the city every day. And in fact, I'll bet I'm the only mayoral candidate in history who ever rode his bike to the mayoral debate, as I did this evening. And those e-bikes have made things a lot more dangerous, not just for pedestrians. So I've been calling to speed limit them since the beginning of my campaign. I totally agree with that. And I will tell you, just in the past couple of months, since police have started issuing citations, the e-bikes are behaving themselves a lot more. I see a lot fewer blowing through red lights, blowing up on the sidewalk.
Thank you, Mr. Tilson. Let's remind you guys that these are the people taking, most of them, your food to your offices and your homes. Mr. Mandan.
You know, I find it ridiculous to hear Andrew Cuomo talk about how we need to regulate the apps when this is the very mayoral candidate who has a super PAC that received $1 million from DoorDash. How are you going to regulate DoorDash when they are giving you $1 million to influence your street safety regulations and your labor regulations? This model, this economic model, is one that doesn't just incentivize e-bike riders to break street safety laws. It often requires
Thank you,
them
Mr.
to do so to make the
Mr. Cuomo, do you want to respond to that?
Yes. I work for the people of the state of New York, the people of the city of New York. I don't care who gave me what. I do what is right, and that's how I.
But you don't feel compromised?
That's how I've always run my.
But don't you feel
career.
compromised?
I just said the apps should be held responsible. They are the ones who should have to license the bike, register the bike. They should be responsible for the fees. They're the ones who are making the money.
Thank you, Mr.
And in terms of who represents who.
Thank you very much. We have to go to Mr. Blake.
Mr. Blake.
Just want to make sure we internalize that Andrew Cuomo just said, I don't care who gave me what. That's not a man who's actually going to break the corruption in City Hall. You need a new vision right here. To your question around e-bikes, one of the reasons why we cannot have an increase of people getting tickets is that it will absolutely lead to the harassment of more communities of color and immigrants in particular. Now, we definitely have to focus on what's happening around speed limits, but also how to reimagine what our city can be, because we cannot continue to have a 2025 city with a 1905 infrastructure.
Mr. Blake,
so we've laid out the vision at BlakeForNYC.com on how to address e-bikes as well as a new city.
Mr. Stringer.
Let me start by asking, just answering the question. Yes, I think 15 miles an hour is reasonable, and I think the mayor is right about this. But in the time that I have, I do want to follow up about DoorDash, because that $1 million contribution crossed the Rubicon. And the contributions of donors who were giving between $250,000 and $1 million are fundamentally buying the mayoralty. And that is something that we spent 20 years never trying to get to again since City Fiscal.
Mr. Stringer, thank you.
You are writing a new book about how to take the mayoralty 1, 2, 3. And I find it
Mr. Stringer,
offensive.
thank you. Brief response, Mr. Cuomo.
Yeah. I live with the campaign finance rules. They're talking about an independent expenditure committee. And let's remember who represents who here. I am the person on this stage who represents the working men and women of New York City. The labor unions have endorsed me, over 650,000 strong.
You were fined by the campaign finance board. I got this.
We have to move on. I think the issue's been spoken to and addressed. We have another question here for you. We'd like 30 seconds on this. You've all spent years in politics. What's your biggest regret? We'll begin with you, Mr. Blake.
Well, right now it's dealing with the Campaign Finance Board, who is illegally not having me on the second stage, where they have now admitted in writing 4 times that they made incorrect determinations of my matching funds. And if you go to our website, you're going to see we challenge that.
Is that a regret of something? Your regret in this? Or?
Well, my regret is that I've been trying to have patience with the Campaign Finance Board.
Okay, Mr. Blake, thank you. Mr. Mamdani, biggest regret in your years in politics?
You know, as a Democrat, one of my regrets is having trusted the leaders within our own party, leaders like Andrew Cuomo. Because what we've seen is that kind of leadership has delivered us to this point where we are under attack by an affordability crisis on the inside and a Trump administration on the outside. And Democrats are tired of being told by leaders from the past that we should continue to simply wait our turn. We should continue to simply trust when we know that's the very leadership that got us to this point. We need to turn the page for new leadership to take us out.
Mr. Tilson?
Yeah, my biggest regret is that I didn't see Joe Biden's decline and call for him to resign earlier. It wasn't until after the debate that I became one of the loudest voices publicly, nationally, calling on him to step aside. But unfortunately, by then it was too late, and we handed Donald Trump the presidency.
Mr. Cuomo, your regrets in all the years you've spent in politics?
That the Democratic Party got to a point that we allowed Mr. Trump to be elected, that we've gotten to a point where rhetoric has no connection with reality, where a person who has served in government for several years, only passed 3 bills, believes they have the experience and credentials to run the greatest city on the earth. And the Democratic Party seems okay with that.
Mr. Cuomo, this question
all.
was about your personal regret in your years of politics.
I said I regret the state of the Democratic Party is
No
in that
personal
we elected
regrets.
Trump.
Not the 15.
No regrets when it comes to cutting Medicaid or health care. No regrets when it comes to cutting child care. No regrets when it comes to slow walking PPE and vaccinations in the season of COVID to black and brown communities. Really, no regrets. No regrets.
We have to protect Medicare for our city's retirees.
Okay, we're getting up. We want
Medicare
everyone to be able to
Advantage for
respond.
city's retirees.
Okay, we want to respond to this, Mr. Cuomo. You only have a few seconds.
Yeah, but
No, I understand, but
it's not. It is just not accurate. Medicaid went up under me. I led the nation under COVID. I pushed President Trump to give us everything he had.
Thank you, Mr. Cuomo. Right.
I
We
was
asked you the
there
biggest
every
regret.
day
You expressed it.
leading COVID.
No regrets.
I have to ask him something. Mr. Cuomo, I'm sorry. I'm sure that people at home must be wondering about your answer to this question, because we speak to voters throughout the city, and quite a few of them will say, I'm not sure exactly what happened with those sexual harassment cases. We know that you say you never sexually harassed anybody. You say you're running to restore efficient government and efficient leadership. But in the past, your leadership came with what more than one investigation concluded was a toxic work environment, especially for women. And some of those cases are still ongoing. So I just want to ask you, since we're talking about regrets, you have apologized to some of those women back when you were still governor. What do you say to voters now, looking ahead to your potential mayoralty? Are you doing anything differently? And why should they believe that that same situation won't happen again?
Yeah, Melissa, let's just make sure we have the facts. A report was done 4 years ago making certain allegations. I said at the time that it was political and it was false. 5 district attorneys, Democratic, Republican, short, tall, looked at it all across the state, found absolutely nothing. 1 case has been resolved. I was dropped from that case. I said at the time that if I offended anyone, it was unintentional, but I apologize, and I say that today.
There was also a Justice Department investigation, but we'll move on because we're out of time.
We detoured there because of the issue raised, but we also want everyone to respond. Mr. Myrie, biggest regret in politics?
I regret not having secured more funding for after school earlier in my career, but I want to turn to Andrew because during—
These are short answers, Mr. Myrie, on your regrets.
I have 30 seconds, correct?
Yes.
When I was in the ICU during COVID, writing legislation to protect my community, you were the most powerful person in this state, and you were in the governor's mansion taking a $5 million deal. Do you regret taking the $5 million, and will you give it back?
Yeah. First of all, that's not true. I stood up every day and fought for this state, for COVID, against President Trump, for PPE, for masks. I was in emergency rooms.
I was in a hospital.
All right, gentlemen, I understand.
Garbage bags for PPE.
Yes.
Do you regret taking $5 million?
We're going to pick up.
We were doing everything we could every day to get—
Mr. Cuomo, people aren't going to hear you if you— We are going to finish this.
Take a break.
We have a break right now that we have to take. We will pick up with the issue, I assure you. We're just about at the 1-hour break. We're going to continue this online. Channel 4 goes to regular programming, but wherever you stream News 4 New York, continue watching us. We will be right back with more of this discussion.
Well, look at that. Everybody's streaming, even WNBC in New York City. So we're not alone. Obviously, everybody taking a quick swig of some water, and they'll go back to the debate. We do not want to send it back just yet because we are getting ready and approaching our Hurricane IQ weather impact special, which will happen at 8 o'clock. Our team of meteorologists going to have so much information for us that if you miss it, you can watch it again on WCNC Plus. So I know a lot of you who are already watching are saying, why already do that? Well,